Okay. Just first, a little bit about AKA. AKA is a grassroots volunteer organization founded over 30 years ago to promote education, connection, and support across the adoption constellation. We welcome all members of the adoption constellation, including adopted people, birth and first parents, adoptive parents, extended family members, and professionals. We also welcome our adjacent communities of donor-conceived persons and DNA discoveries. These parties are often separated, but AKA believes that great benefit comes from learning and sharing together. As a nonprofit powered by volunteers, we rely primarily on membership dues for the operation of our organization. If you're not currently a member, please consider joining. Today's featured speaker may discuss sensitive subject matter, and today's discussion may be triggering. We want to remind you to take good care of yourself. If you need help, the National Hotline for Mental Health Crises and Suicide Prevention is 800-950-6264, or you can call or text the Suicide and Crisis Lifeline at 988. To minimize distraction, please mute yourself during the meeting. If you have a question, you can raise your hand or type it in the chat. If opinions are expressed during the meeting that make you uncomfortable, we ask you to please listen, reflect, and respond respectfully. We strive to provide a space where our members feel safe to share individual experiences, support, and gain knowledge from each other. So, welcome to Heidi Marble and Alyssa Zalma. Heidi Marble is a domestically, or maybe she's domesticated, I don't know.
No. We can talk about that later, but no.
Completely wild.
I am feral. Okay, keep going.
She is domestically adopted and host of the internationally acclaimed podcast, Pulled by the Root, which focuses on issues surrounding adoption. Since publishing her first book, Waiting for Wings, A Women's Metamorphosis Through Cancer, she has given over 150 keynote addresses. Dang! She has been featured on CBS's Bay Area Sunday and ABC's Sacramento and Company, among other shows and publications. Heidi established a charitable organization that partnered with multiple hospitals and the fashion industry. Those endeavors created the opportunity for her to sit on 2 hospital boards in Oregon and California. Her advocacy work now extends into the adoption community, where she hopes to help reshape the narrative. Love that. Heidi's new book, Pulled by the Root, An Adoptee's Healing Journey from Trauma, Shame, and Loss, is the focus of our book club today. It is a raw, vivid, and cinematic account of Heidi's lived experience as an adopted person. The story is led by Heidi as she pieces together her identity and comes home to her true self. Each chapter is followed by psychiatrist Alyssa Zalma's commentary, which extracts the essence of what is happening psychologically and spiritually. So without further ado, I will hand it over to Heidi and Alyssa.
Oh, thank you so much for having us. I was looking at your organization and was so impressed by the connection, education, and support and inclusiveness. And I one line from your website that really struck me was that we are here to support each other, learn from each other on our individual journeys toward wholeness. And on my journey, meeting my co-author, Elisa Zalma, through music, I never thought that it would end up being a partnership that would be life-changing. And so I'm just so pleased, Elisa, that you are here with me tonight and that we can talk about our work together. And for those of you that might not have read the back of the book, Dr. Zalma is a board-certified psychiatrist who received her MD from Tufts University. She completed her medical internship at Harvard Medical School and a residency in psychiatry at Oregon Health and Sciences University. Her areas of specialty include psychoanalytical perspective on adoption, eating disorders, body image, trauma, depressive, and anxiety spectrum disorders, and holistic approaches to mind, body, and energy medicine. She is the director of the Shira Chandra Center, an Oregon-based day retreat that promotes healing, health, and wellness through yoga, meditation, energy, ceremonies. She has been in private practice for 20 years. So part of the running joke between us is that I could not have done this without like a psychiatrist. I needed the top tier level of mental health help during this. But ultimately, our friendship and then collaboration turned into something really spectacular because we do not have a therapeutic relationship. And Elisa, if it's okay with you, I'd like to give people a little history on how the book was born.
You bet. I always love hearing you tell it.
So I wrote my first book and I was going to write a second book about my survival of cancer. And I kept writing, but I was writing about adoption. I wasn't writing about my survival of cancer. And I wrote for years and years, and I never read my writing. And then my adopted mom passed away. And I decided to print out what I had. And it was in the beginning of our book, Pulled by the Root. I talk about that scene very specifically when the pages were coming out of the computer. And it was so overwhelming to hear the. And then when I held it, it was 300 pages plus. And of course, it was complete chaos. But I knew I had a book. And in that moment, I knew the title. It was Pulled by the Root. And the thing that was so significant about that moment for me is that the weight of the book felt like the weight of my mother's ashes. It was like, I can't even explain it. It was just something I knew that I needed to do. And so I started to attack this very tangled mess of writing and try to shape it into something. And I told my 18, 19-year-old son, Blake, I'm going to write a book. And he looks at me and goes, Mom, you think you might be better off getting an expert in there just than, doing it on your own? And I'm like, what do you mean? I'm not an expert. So the minute he said that, though, I thought, oh my gosh, I know exactly who I'm going to approach. So my son is into classical music and we would go to these beautiful concerts. He plays piano. And Elisa and I met through these beautiful social events. So music is the baseline of our relationship. And I thought, oh my goodness, I wonder if she would consider just giving a little, backbone to this as far as psychological information. And we met for lunch and she said, absolutely. And then over time, we just decided that this format of breaking down each chapter and having these two voices like together made so much sense to us. And so, Elise, I don't know if you want to jump in. I mean, that's my version of what happened.
No, thank you. That is, I love hearing that story. That is absolutely how the book got born. But the creative process between the two of us then became kind of a microcosm, from what I understand of this amazing organization that we're talking to tonight, about being able to broaden the perspective on how to heal. What's the healing journey from traumas related to adoption to include as many segments of the adoption community as possible. Have so much permission, have so much space to have non-judgment, have so much ability to kind of traverse different areas that felt like they would limit our audience, and chose to really try to expand on how we can offer what the healing journey can be. And that's when Heidi and I started talking specifically about her story. But being able to generalize it to other segments of the adoption community. And so then Heidi got some other really beautiful ideas about how she was going to expand our podcast, which has been around now, I've got to say, at least 4 years. So the book started being written first, or not first, but in tandem. And then the ideas from including it to as many segments of this population as possible then helped her, as I remember it, give creative all of her creativity to be able to do such a beautiful job on the podcast and bring all segments of the adoption community into the podcast. First families, adoptees, domestic, international, people who've written about adoption, people who have chosen to remain anonymous, transracial, people from the education community, the foster care community, the mental health community. She has talked to everybody. So from that, then we got more ability to figure out how I was going to be of help and how I would be able to use what I know is effective in my psychiatric practice to fine tune it and make it specific for the adoption community at large. And that was how we did our tag team. About each chapter in the book ends with my perspective on how we can heal from different specific traumas from Heidi's story, but how we universalize them to include hopefully every single person who's going to listen to this recording today and every single person who is involved in this community.
Yeah, so beautifully said, Elisa. And that is the problem when you're writing your own story, because I think that one of the greatest gifts humans can do is share their stories, because we can see ourselves in each other. And, at first I thought, wow, do I want to reveal all of this? And it's very scary. Adopted people, well, people don't like rejection, but in particular, adopted people really don't like it. So you're putting you're exposing everything. And what was kind of torturous about this is we had 180,000 word manuscript, and the publisher that we got said, you need to cut it in half. I was like, what? So Elise and I don't know, you didn't have a meltdown, I did. But what it did, at first that news was really difficult, but what it did is it really forced us to distill and create something even more powerful and meaningful. And I think that having that double excavation process was really, really important. And I know that writing and music and the arts are very, very powerful. And when I think about how I wrote this book, it was the first time that I told my truth in its entirety. And I do say my truth because everybody's version of the truth is different. But every word of this is my truth, and I stand by it. And I love quotes. I write them all the time. And the one that came to mind when I started the chapter about my adopted mom, and I'll just read it to you because it's very important to me. And I know you guys have read the book, but still, I just think it's important. In another woman's womb, I was knitted of bone and blood, born to her and raised by you, losing both of my mothers while they were still alive, is the empty place I carry. And so the loss in adoption, coming to terms with how that affected and affects the way I go about my life and my relationships. One of the things I always said is I want to find peace with this before I leave this earth. That is the goal, just to have some kind of peace. And I have to thank Elisa, because when I would present her with a chapter, she would give me her commentary. And every time I would sit down and just go, dang it, I never thought of that. She got into the parts of my mind and flipped them. Like the scene with my dad, where I'm confronting him finally, my adopted dad. And when you said to me, Elisa, that it was like emotional castration, I know that's a very kind of awful thing to say, but it was. I was finally able to get revenge in that moment, and to realize that I was capable of that and that I did that. like having to come to terms with those dark sides of self and be able to heal those. And I just want to thank you, Elisa, because when we were going through this, I know you're not my therapist, but I think that's what made it so spectacular, is that our friendship was blending into your knowledge. And I don't know, you were just weaving through me and helping me have just one realization after another.
Mm. Now, I do remember all those points, and it was always so exciting and freeing that we do not have a therapeutic relationship, to be able to speak to your individual story and see through your lens what I thought would relate to our whole audience. And to take that example, the idea about emotional castration, and to kind of look at the dark sides of ourselves. And if we're talking about the adoption community, of course we are, that's what we're talking about tonight, but the human race, humanity at large, everybody has a quote dark side. We talk about this in our chapter on archetypes, the Santia chapter. But particularly this chapter about your dad, what you describe is a piece of what's called what Carl Jung called the shadow self, or the archetype of the shadow. Most people have heard of that. It's in the popular press right now, about working through your shadow selves, or working through that. That kind of comes through in this book as kind of a beacon of hope, in terms of elements of ourselves that we like the least. If we shine a light on them in a very non-judgmental sort of way, we can find all the answers we need. We cannot kind of kill these pieces of ourselves off because they're part of us, but in fact we can in fact nurture them and hold them close, so that they don't have to quote yell at us as much as they do, which feels like the dark piece of self, which, in reference to this piece of the book with your dad, and basically in reference to all of the chapters that you write about pieces of yourself, or as you're talking to our audience about pieces of self that people find unacceptable or people want to hide. Not to go chapter by chapter, I'll leave that to Q&A, but each chapter gives opportunity for anybody in the adoption community to really have a good look at their shadow self and use it for good.
Yeah, and I think that's the point, because boy, guilt, shame, just like the subtitle,
Yes.
you know, the guilt, it's huge. The shame is huge. The trauma, these are all very big, heavy things that we have to cope with in one way or another. And trying to find a way to be more compassionate to ourselves, to try to have a deeper understanding of why we feel that way. I don't know about all of you, but a lot of self-sabotaging and self-punishing and all of those things that serve no purpose, right? How do we find worthiness? And we are worthy. And that's what I want to scream out at the top of my lungs. No matter what's happened to you, you are supposed to be here. You are absolutely supposed to be here. And in fact, I have these little quote cards I pull out, and I pulled out one today to mark my place in the book. And the first part of it says, "Here is your life. You might never have been, but you are, because the party wouldn't be complete without you. Here is the world. It's beautiful and terrible, and I am with you." It's like there's so much beauty and there's so much sadness all like mixed into the human experience. And when you have the adopted human experience, I feel like it's all high definition. You know, I'd be curious to think what all of you feel about that. So when we wrote this book, how to go about it was really a challenge, as far as the chapters and how do I introduce, for lack of a better word, the characters in my life who were so influential. And I almost felt that it was really important, instead of blending the story, that each person had their own little world. and that I was able to tell you about them. And somebody asked me what was one of my favorite chapters, and it probably has to be my Uncle Jack.
Mm.
He was such a character. And I think about how embarrassed I used to be of him and all of the things, but inside of all of this sadness and confusion, there were these amazing, powerful characters that came into my life that contributed so much to the strength and tenacity that we have to survive all of this. And I wanted to honor them by being truthful about them and truthful about my experience of them. And then, of course, my Wangi, my grandmother, they're all gone now, but I feel her presence so deeply in everything that I do. And she is the reason that I was able to connect with my biological family. She had a healthy idea of me being adopted long before we had all the education that we have now. She wasn't threatened by it. She actually was excited. She wanted to participate. And that felt like such a gift to me that she came by my side. And in that space with her, I didn't feel the guilt. It was such a relief. So, I'm tearing on here. But yeah, each one of these people that I write about, they're very, very important to me. Very important.
I think each character in the book, and I know this is Heidi's hope and mine too, that can touch the strands of anybody who reads it, from the adoption community or otherwise, to try to relate to and have a similar experience with trying to get past the universal experiences of, say, shame or guilt or feeling unworthy, or playing the kind of what if games, or if the if only games. If only I, were a more worthy person, my biological family wouldn't have left me. Or if only I had done something different, my adopted mother wouldn't have been so harsh with me. Or there are various points in the book that Heidi describes that I do believe, like, even if it's not the exact circumstance, of course, that people can relate to. And again, curious about what people want to say about the Q&A about it, but how people potentially are going to use Heidi's story to help get past these kind of, quote, shadow pieces of self, and basically how to do that. How to get past shadow pieces of self by understanding, in some ways, that these pieces were there for a reason during various pieces of development through in the adoption community, whether people knew about their adoption from the beginning or not, and how many people they actually met or not, interfaces with foster care, interfaces with educational systems, interface with educational systems, all of the interfaces, to try to understand and make peace with the purpose that these unacceptable pieces of self provide. So I don't want to get too much into it now. Maybe we'll have some questions about it, but that is a very central piece of the book, chapter by chapter.
Yeah, thank you for that, Elisa. And the healing journey still continues for me. And of course, we all know when certain things happen in life, whoa, it all floods back in. But what has been amazing is that there's been an awareness after doing this really deep work. Now I can identify why the behavior is happening. And to me, that, for lack of a better term, that feels like some sort of healing. Even though there's still disruption, at least I understand why. Like when my son leaves and I'm going to see him in a week, why am I crying for 2 days? Because he left me. And it's like, okay, whoa, this is 100% adoption. Stop, calm down. So it really helps. And I think that's why, and I don't want to call it work like it's labor, but maybe self-discovery. Elisa, maybe you can help me with the terminology, because I don't want to scare people away from approaching different ways of healing
Yeah.
Whether it's
Yeah.
counseling, reading, listening to podcasts, or all of it.
Yeah, no, that's a beautiful example in the here and now of a lot of what we talked about in the book about transgenerational trauma and repetitions of patterns that happen if you're not aware of how your past informs your future. And the awareness of it, yes, self-discovery. I like to kind of think about it, and it is in one of the chapters, and I'm not remembering which exact chapter, but the idea of having free choice and free will. I think it's at the end we kind of talk about it more specifically, but the idea of free will, it doesn't mean that things are not going to trigger you, or that experiences moving forward in your life will not affect you. But as you start healing from the transgenerational traumas of adoption, depending on how you use the past to not re-traumatize yourself, but use it for good, you start to develop an ability to have free choice. So, Heidi, for your example about your son leaves and you start to feel, perhaps I call it the punishment doesn't fit the crime, about a big emotion or an emotion in stereo about something. And then you have some awareness and it's like, oh, not only, okay, that's why, but I have some choices here. I don't have to repeat. Thank goodness, I don't have to repeat what has come before. I don't have to repeat the traumas I've had in my life. I don't have to repeat either of my mother's traumas. I don't have to repeat any of the things, any of it. Like the torch was handed to me and it can stop here.
Yeah, and that really feels great because I like to slip into victimhood. I've talked about this on the podcast.
Yep.
You know, the pity party with the balloons and everything. Just, you know, sometimes it feels like, why me? Why did this happen? Why us? You know, it's asking those questions. And what I'm realizing that it's okay to ask those questions. That's part of the process. But like staying stuck in that, it's just, you know, you're just circling the drain. And it's not, I don't know, transcendence is the right word. But I love what you said, Elisa, is that because we were put in a choiceless situation,
Yes.
you're infant, you're not choosing where you're being deposited in all of this stuff. And you don't have agency over yourself, right? And
No,
so
yes,
so
absolutely.
when you feel like, oh gosh, I have a torch and I can stop this, because I know I asked my son the other day, I said, hey, do you think you could come back and we could start over, like just for 18 years? And now that I know what I know, maybe I could do a better job. Because, you know, parenting and relationships, wow, it's so complicated. Unfortunately, we can't rewind, but what I'm hoping, and I hope Elisa can verify this, is that those things can be improved by going back and telling, like my son, I understand now more. And,
Yes.
you know,
Yes, and sometimes it is just an implicit understanding. Sometimes you don't have to go tell the person what you know. You can show up in a way that lets other people know that you are now at a point in your life where it's not about rewinding, it's about a cycle. And I like to think of it as kind of a conical experience that each time you go around, you have an experience of ascension and you gather energy as you continue to go up around, okay, people who have had any interface with the adoption community, a lot of them feel like they didn't have a choice, right? They didn't have a choice. And how do they ever get to a place where they feel like they have agency in their life or they actually have a choice in any of it? And that's really what our book's about, going from feeling pulled by the root to feeling that you have some sense to have free choice and free agency around the act of pulling instead of being pulled. One feels like it's done to you, and one feels like you have free choice. And that is part of the experience that I know you've tried to offer our readers, and part of the ongoing process of us continuing to have discussions like this one and open it up to the community and have people's input, and excited to share with everybody here tonight about their own experiences and how we can participate with people here.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the title, you know, if you look at the front cover of the book, the roots they're like inverted. It's the same thing. So they go up and they go down, and there's the hope. And the book is in the middle because that's the space I was able to flip it a little bit and decide that I can make my own set of roots, and they can reach higher, maybe not still in the dirt and in the muck. So metaphorically, it's really important to me. And I just want to make one more point about the chapter that we wrote about my son, Blake. It's called A Simple Man, and that's based on the song by, I think it's Leonard Skinner did it originally. And yeah, woo, I see everybody. But I wanted to surprise him for his wedding, but we didn't want the Leonard Skinner version. So we found someone to do an acoustic version. And I'll never forget dancing with him to that song and the way that he looked at me. And I knew that we were letting go of that part of our life together, that he was now a man and he was going to go do this. And it was very important to me that when I wrote his chapter, that I read it to him in my voice, and that he was okay with me putting it out into the world. And I was very nerve-wracked because my son is not one to give compliments. Sorry, Blake, it's true. And so I read this with trepidation. We get to the end and he's just sitting there and I'm like, great. And he says, you know, Mom, I just want to tell you, you are enough and you did enough. And I was just like, that's all I needed to hear. You know, because I didn't feel like I did. You know, we always say we did the best we can. Did we really? Are you sure? You know, so it's questioning all of those things. But I guess what I'm trying to say is, from a psychological standpoint, is we don't have to hit ourselves so hard. We come from this very difficult situation, and I really feel one of the things I've learned about our community is people are ravenous to figure this out, to find a way to love self and others. And we are pulling in all of this amazing information. And I'm just so grateful that our podcast and our book can be a tiny little offering that may be helpful. And so I just want to say I'm so grateful to everyone that read the book, that listens to the podcast, that took the time to like hold my pain and my joy in your hands. I just am very grateful, and so grateful to Elisa for the years and years of writing this together. So, yeah. And I forgot my Kleenex. Damn it.
Oh, well, thanks. Thank you, Heidi. I mean, it's been an incredible journey. We are continuing it. And again, we are so excited and honored to be here. I don't know if we've talked enough or we've talked too much, but we want to.
I think we could talk forever. So I think we ought to let the people talk.
Because we want to hear other people talk, and we want to have opportunity to answer questions or
Yes.
have a dialogue with everybody.
Let's do it.